Hello and welcome to Virtual Investor Conferences. My name is Eric May, and on behalf of OTC Markets, as well as our co-host, Zacks Small Cap Research, we're very pleased you have joined us for our next slide presentation from Kineta Inc. Please note, you can submit questions in the box to the left of the slides. You can also view the company's availability for one-on-one meetings through the Schedule Meetings tab found on the conference platform. At this point, I am very pleased to welcome the next presenters, John Vandermosten, Senior Life Sciences Analyst with Zacks Small Cap Research, and Sean I. Donato, Chief Executive Officer of Kineta Inc., which trades on the NASDAQ under the symbol KA. Welcome, John and Sean.
Great, and thank you. And I'm Senior Life Sciences Analyst John Vandermosten, as Eric mentioned, and speaking with the CEO of Kineta, Dr. Sean I. Donato. Kineta's lead program is developing a checkpoint inhibitor that targets the VISTA protein. The monoclonal antibody is called KVA12123 and is in phase 1/2 clinical trials to target VISTA. The company recently shared new data from its study at SITC and was published in the journal Frontiers in Immunology. Dr. Donato, welcome to the Life Sciences Virtual Investor Forum.
Thank you very much, John. Good to be with you.
It is good to be here. And I just want to make a point for people watching this. In the Resources tab, the full deck is available for download in case you want to reference that. So Sean, Dr. Donato, please tell us more about your lead program and the new data that was reported last month in the journal article and at the scientific conference.
Sure. Yeah, so we presented data at SITC on KVA12123, which is a monoclonal antibody we developed to block a target called VISTA. VISTA is a strongly immunosuppressive checkpoint, and you see it very highly expressed in colder or more difficult to treat tumors. So the new data that we presented at SITC was really a combination of phase 1 data, dose escalation data in advanced solid tumors. It was a combination of safety data and also biomarker and target engagement data. One of the challenges with targeting the VISTA target has been that there have been some off-target effects associated with this, principally CRS, or cytokine release syndrome. So during our preclinical development program, we very carefully introduced 3 mutations into the antibody to try to preserve strong single-agent tumor growth inhibition while mitigating risk around CRS. So this initial readout at SITC really was reading out safety data, really demonstrating the antibody was safe without any dose-limiting toxicities, no CRS, no consistent pattern of adverse events. I think that was important to really differentiate us from other antibodies in this space. And then furthermore, we were able to demonstrate that there's a clear dose-dependent target engagement with KVA12123, and we really see that through receptor occupancy, so we can measure target engagement in blood cells from our patients. And we also see activation of a very specific immune response, which is consistent with engagement of VISTA, and that includes the dose-dependent increase in key cytokines, and also key cell populations like NK cells and CD8 positive T cells that are important in tumor control.
Great, thank you for that summary. And you're working with checkpoint inhibitors, and that's probably one of the hottest areas of immuno-oncology right now. And in fact, the leading drug in immuno-oncology is Keytruda, which we'll talk about later. And that I think it's generating over $20 billion a year, which is pretty impressive. Keytruda and some of the other well-known checkpoints are blocking PD-1 and PD-L1, but you are working with VISTA, which is a little bit different, and it's probably a little bit less familiar for listeners and viewers. Tell us how VISTA is different from the more familiar PD-1, PD-L1 checkpoint inhibitors.
Yeah, so VISTA is a member of what we refer to as the B7 family. It is related to PD ligand 1. So it is similar in terms of its function and how it works in the body. And the main difference between VISTA and other checkpoints is that while VISTA is expressed at a low level on T cells, most of its expression are on cell populations of the innate immune system. So these are things like monocytes, macrophages, neutrophils. And we often see those cell populations in colder tumors. They can be programmed to be either immunosuppressive or inflammatory. And when we have a colder tumor with many immunosuppressive innate immune cells, we see very high levels of the VISTA checkpoint. So in patients that actually have a T cell response to their tumor, they still don't have good immune tumor control because the tumor is infiltrated with immunosuppressive immune cells, and those immunosuppressive immune cells express high levels of VISTA.
Okay, very good. And I think Keytruda I think is probably most associated with melanoma as one of the targeted cancers that it does well in. What are some of the most common cancers that you can address with KV12123?
Yeah, so we have a big screening program where we're trying to look at least 50 histology slides from all of the major cancer categories. And the picture that's emerging is in some of these more difficult to treat tumors like non-small cell lung cancer, colorectal cancer, renal cell carcinoma, ovarian cancer, you have a very strong infiltrate of these innate immune cells. For example, in non-small cell lung cancer, we have a big neutrophil immune infiltrate in tumor there. Those neutrophils are expressing very high levels of VISTA, indicating that that's a very immune suppressed tumor microenvironment. Again, also in colorectal cancer, very strong infiltrate of mononuclear immune cells, again, expressing very high levels of VISTA. We see a similar picture in renal cell carcinoma, head and neck, bladder. And so that's kind of a consistent picture of tumor types that are expressing VISTA on the immune cells. There are a very small number of cancer types that express VISTA on the tumor cell itself. And some examples of that are ovarian and endometrial cancer, and also mesothelioma. So those are some different types of tumors where we see very high levels of VISTA expression.
Okay, I see. And when we think about the strategy for approaching a certain indication, I guess we could either pursue a large indication like NSCLC, like you mentioned, or a smaller one. One of them has more competitors, one of them has less. And obviously it depends on the data you generate. But kind of what factors guide where you'll go beyond just I guess the efficacy that you show in these trials that are looking at broader groups of tumors.
Yeah. So right now we're running a basket trial. And the combination arms in the trial currently include combinations with pembrolizumab, Keytruda. And we think there's a good opportunity for pairing our product with other T-cell directed therapies, whether they be pembro or ipilimumab or other related molecules in that space. And that's because in general, those existing checkpoint inhibitors that are in the market that target PD-1, CTLA-4, or LAG-3 are really T-cell directed products. Whereas Kineta is developing this product against VISTA. VISTA is expressed very highly on other cells of the immune response that we find in tumor. It's able to de-repress other types of immune cells in the tumor. And we think it will be generally complementary or synergistic to the already marketed antibodies like Merck's Keytruda.
Okay, yeah, complementarity. That's the big turn there. So more and more cancer treatments are using combination therapies, as you are, for more effective responses. Because I think we realize that cancer is a multifactorial disease. We need to come at it from different directions. So Kineta is also doing that, and as you mentioned, it's with Merck's Keytruda, which is obviously the big 800-pound gorilla in the space. Tell us about that collaboration and how it can help advance the anti-VISTA program, the KV12123 program.
Yeah, so the collaboration that we have with Merck is a collaboration around the combination arms or cohorts in our phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trial. It's also a supply agreement, so they are supplying Merck's Keytruda to support the clinical trial. And they've been also assisting us with trial design, which has been very helpful. So I would refer to it primarily as a collaboration and clinical supply arrangement. And of course, combination therapy is really the backbone of all cancer therapy now. Sure. And Merck's Keytruda we expect to be synergistic with our product because they have very distinct mechanisms of action in the immune system. And, Merck and Keytruda are really the 200-pound gorilla in this space. Okay.
And immunotherapy is the other trend in, the trend in the oncology space. It used to be surgery, chemotherapy, and radiotherapy were dominant. But, with immunotherapy over the last, 15 years or so, it's really dominated. Why has it emerged as such a dominant approach? And, has it replaced those other modalities, or has it complemented them? What do you see from your perspective?
Yeah, so basically the picture that I see is that, surgery, radiotherapy, chemotherapy were very effective in patients who are diagnosed early. And in those patients, you can achieve, an effective cure of their cancer through one or some combination of those traditional approaches to cancer treatment. Where immunotherapy has really made a profound difference are in more advanced tumors, people who are diagnosed later, which is, for example, often the case with non-small cell lung cancer, very often the case with colorectal cancer. And when these patients have very advanced disease with mets throughout their body, it's very difficult to get a durable response over a long period of time with just surgery, chemotherapy, or radiotherapy. And that's really what the immunotherapies have, I think, brought to the cancer therapy space. You're able to get complete responses that are very durable over long periods of time in advanced cases of cancer, really leaving aside, the adjuvant and neoadjuvant approaches that have been most recently demonstrated for these drugs.
Yeah, and I think there are probably some instances where you'll actually combine all of these approaches, perhaps surgery, surgery along with chemotherapy and checkpoints and things like that as well. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, the whole future, as it has been, in the recent past, is combination therapy. There's been even a lot of success in combination therapy with immunotherapy in combination with different types of chemotherapy. So they're looking at this matrix of different options is always a key part of developing new products and really getting them licensed in the right combinations.
Yeah, exactly. So, the Keytruda relationship is not the only one you have with Merck. Merck is a huge company with its, with a lot of different programs going on. So you have actually an agreement with them for a neuromuscular asset, a neuromuscular disease, and ALS. How has this arrangement turned out, and what's the upside here?
Yeah, so we entered the public markets through a reverse merger last year with Humanity. And Humanity was a neuroscience-focused company, and there are three licensing transactions that the company had at the time of the merger. One was the Merck transaction in neuromuscular disease more generally, ALS more specifically, so Lou Gehrig's disease. We also have a partnership with Genentech and another with Fair Therapeutics. The Merck collaboration is very active. There's been very active work done on small molecule drugs that are being developed for ALS there. And we were excited to announce actually in July a milestone payment from Merck for $5 million, which was really the next milestone for that particular program. That program could pay out up to $225 million in milestones, and there is a single-digit royalty associated with that license as well.
Okay. Is there any sense of timing for any of these other potential milestones that you might qualify for?
So we see that licensing agreement as potentially delivering about one milestone per year to Kineta. But in our public disclosures of our financials, we don't actually predict or that we don't predict any milestone payments in our analysis of the company's financial statements.
Sounds good. So, also wanted to get a sense of kind of what we might see going forward for the KVA 12123 trial. In terms of milestones there, not payment milestones, but just in terms of, trial enrollment pace and things like that, and when we might see data. What should we see in terms of those metrics over the next 24 months or so?
Sure. So we actually expect to have the phase 1 portion of that phase 1/2 trial that we're currently running fully enrolled by the end of the first quarter of 2024. And we would be hoping to read out further safety biomarker and also initial efficacy data, for example, iRECIST, either at AACR or ASCO in April or June, respectively, of next year. Okay. So those are the closest next catalysts for the company. And then we will go back to the FDA to discuss our recommended phase 2 dose with them. And then we expect in the fourth quarter to be initiating the phase 2 component of that trial. That includes a number of dose expansion cohorts in those tumor types that we discussed earlier that have high levels of expression of VISTA in the tumor.
Sounds good. So now we're on to the obligatory M&A question. This is something I like to bring up because it's the exit strategy that we see with a lot of the smaller cap life sciences companies. M&A is up year over year. As I said on a previous interview, that I think it was $223 billion so far. We still have a couple weeks left. Oncology generally dominates these transactions. I think in past years, we've seen about just over half of the transactions actually be in oncology. So, Dr. Ayodanado, what do you see out there in terms of trends in oncology? What are large pharma companies looking for? And when is the right time to talk to them? Because it seems like things are heating up, especially on a year-over-year basis in the M&A space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think what big pharma is looking for is novel mechanisms. I think it's very difficult to really get any purchase with in a partnering transaction with kind of a Me Too drug or a drug that's in a very crowded space from a competitive perspective. So novel mechanisms of action, certainly novel mechanisms that have the potential to be synergistic with, established checkpoint inhibitor therapy like Merck's Keytruda. A couple of other areas that I think are really getting very interesting recently are the bispecific T-cell engagers, so antibodies that are directed against T cells and a tumor antigen. And also we're seeing some interesting very early data with mRNA vaccines in combination with checkpoint inhibitors. And I think in addition to the work that we're doing with Vista, those could be two other areas that are attractive from an M&A perspective in the next year.
Okay. And those bispecifics, they actually bring the T cell to the tumor cell. I mean, they're actually kind of like a navigator in some sense. Okay.
Right.
Very good.
Right.
One of the other areas that's been pretty hot is the ADCs. I think there have been at least 2 transactions, one that's supposed to close later this week, and then there's some other asset transactions that I saw recently as well. What do you think of that space, and does that complement what you're doing at all?
Yeah, I think the ADC space is undeniably an attractive space. There have been a lot of transactions in that space. It's been a difficult area that's really developed over many years. And they've really done a good job of kind of managing the toxicities associated with ADCs. And I think also there's additional interest because for many antibodies, many people speculate that the antibody-directed cell killing is part of the mechanism of action. For example, for ipilimumab, antibody-directed killing of Tregs may be part of the mechanism of action. So that's kind of a natural way where immunotherapy might overlap with an ADC conjugate in certain types of tumors.
Okay, very good. Well, I think we've reached the point now where we can move on to some of the investor questions. I've got a few here. So it looks like I think you had mentioned FDA conversations earlier in our talk, and the question here is: has the company had any engagement with the FDA on your Vista drug program, and further on, have they provided any guidance in terms of what they'd like to see in clinical trials?
Yeah. So our IND was open in November of 2022. At that time, we had very good discussions with the clinical reviewers at the FDA. Some of your listeners may have heard of Project Optimus at the FDA, which is the FDA's effort to try to encourage companies to explore the dose-dependent effects of their drugs and not just go into phase 2 with the maximum tolerated dose, which has been very common in this space. So we had a very good discussion with FDA about, really how to pick those recommended phase 2 doses and how to work with the FDA to share phase 1 data and kind of get their input on those doses as we go into phase 2. So I would say that has been the majority of the conversation that we've had with FDA.
Okay, very good. And well, in terms of timing, when might you talk with the FDA about, I know we're ways off, but in terms of pivotal trial construction, when does that come about? I guess.
Yeah, so we've already made. Oh, I'm sorry. We've already made some changes to our phase 2 trial design in response to some comments we got from FDA. Again, these were all around their implementation of Project Optimus. And we would expect to go back to FDA with a supplementary data package in the second or third quarter of next year to really build a case for the doses that we want to explore in our expansion cohorts in phase 2.
Okay, I see. Another question here related to biomarkers. Biomarkers are kind of the other big thing in oncology. You've got combination therapies. you've got biomarkers, and there are a lot of studies that show that trials that use biomarkers are a lot more successful than those that don't.
Mhm.
So you actually have an arrangement with Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center related to biomarkers. How is that progressing, and how will you use that information to help guide further trial design?
Yeah. So the first part of that collaboration with the Fred Hutch was to really try to understand where VISTA is expressed in terms of a diverse population of tumors. And we actually had a poster really characterizing VISTA expression in different tissues and tumors at AACR in, I believe it was in 2023. In addition to that, the Fred Hutch group is evaluating all of the tumor samples from our ongoing clinical trials. So we will have historical tumor tissues from all of those patients, and we are taking on-study tumor biopsies to try to understand the relationship between VISTA and other checkpoints and treatment failure or success in our clinical trial. The other thing I would say about biomarkers is in the preclinical development program, we actually characterized a number of plasma-based soluble biomarkers or immunophenotyping biomarkers in both the primate and the mouse that were on-target biomarkers for our program. And we're really seeing very nice dose-dependent increases in these biomarkers, some of which are chemokines, some of which are cell surface express markers in our ongoing clinical trial. So that's excellent validation when you see that consistency between the mouse preclinical work, the primate preclinical work, and now the biomarkers that we're seeing in the phase 1 clinical population.
Got it. Let's see, back to the questions. So it looks like we have another one here, just looking at milestones for 2024, perhaps for your whole portfolio. What do you see coming down the pike over the next 12 months?
Yeah, so for the VISTA program, we expect to be announcing a fuller data package from the phase 1 at either AACR in April or ASCO in June, or a combination of those two meetings. And then we will be, like I said, going back to the FDA, talking about phase 2 trial design and the recommended phase 2 doses. And then we expect in the fourth quarter to be opening that phase 2 trial and enrolling our first patient.
Got it.
For the CD27 program, we do expect to have an IND filing in Q4 of 2024.
Okay, so I guess we could see something in 2025 in the clinic for that?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see, another investor question regarding the milestone payments that we talked about earlier. You have the three different relationships there. Is that a milestone payment for each of the partners, or is that for all of them together at one per year?
We expect a milestone payment for all of our partners together at potentially one per year, but we don't really offer any guidance about the timing of milestone payments from those programs. Those are all out-licensed products, and at this point, the company doesn't have significant control over how those development programs are going.
Sure. Very good. And then we have another question from an investor on the anti-CD27 monoclonal antibody. What is the plan for that candidate? And as you already said, probably by 2025, you will have a cleared IND and be in the clinic.
Yeah, I think CD27 is really interesting, an interesting potential solution to the exhausted T cell problem. Our approach is a little bit different. We're not trying to take exhausted T cells and sort of de-differentiate them into unexhausted T cells. CD27 is primarily expressed on naive T cells. It leads to their expansion. It also reduces their activation threshold to certain tumor antigens. So we think that's a way to replace exhausted T cell populations with a more diverse, more active T cell population by targeting CD27.
Okay, very good. Sounds exciting. I can't wait to see more detail on that as it comes. So another technical question here. Does VISTA exist on any healthy tissues in the body, and what tumor subtypes have VISTA expression?
So VISTA is not widely expressed outside of the immune system. It is expressed in some immune-privileged tissues like placenta, testes, in the eye. There are a handful of cancers where we see VISTA expressed on the tumor. So we talked about ovarian cancer, endometrial, probably generally the gynecological cancers, and also mesothelioma.
Okay. And one last question for me is that, when does it make sense to get into conversations with, more serious conversations with partners? You're already working with Merck, but at what point does it make sense to, I guess, take it to the next step?
Yeah. Well, I think having those discussions prior to that initial efficacy data readout is probably the best approach, simply because you have to have multiple technical interactions with potential partners before a deal can start to coalesce. And so, we think that around the time of that phase 1 data readout is an important time to be really engaged with potential partners.
Okay, and I guess we could, potentially see milestones there if you do move to a more serious relationship.
Right. We hope so. Yes.
Of course. Well, thank you, Dr. Iadonado. I appreciate you answering my questions. I wanted to give you a few minutes at the end here to wrap it up with any final comments and kind of your summary of the, your thoughts on the company and what the opportunity is for investors.
Yeah, well, I think we're in an exciting place. Finally, after kind of a long downturn in biotech, things I think are starting to look better for 2024. And there are a lot of interesting drugs, including our anti-VISTA antibody in this space. And, we expect 2024 to be a really great year for the company and for our products.
Great.